I'm working in RPG Maker, specifically MV, and trying to make a game in RPG Maker, of course, will eventually lead you to Yanfly. This is normally for plugins, but they also have several comics pertaining to creating one's first game and general game design tips. And dear God, these things are hard to read. Unfunny, pretentious, mean-spirited. Jesus. So where to begin? Well, the kind of sort of protagonist, Ralph, instead of being treated like a student who's still learning, is treated like an idiot. He's just a straw man for naive developer, derogatory. I assume it's supposed to be funny that he's just always brazenly opposed to the teachings of Yanfly and Flying Dream, but turning the point of view character into the butt of every shonen anime tier joke is very not funny. A recurring point is that Ralph spent 5 years on a game he was making and got 10% of that game done. This, for some goddamn reason, is played for laughs. What's ignored by the comic as a whole is that two key things can be picked up from failing to make a game for 5 years. One, programming knowledge. You don't lose your ability to make events effectively by not releasing a game. And two, what not to do. Failure is the best teacher. But instead of comforting Ralph, instead of using his failure as a learning experience, Yanfly doubles down, confirms Ralph's fears that he wasted 5 years of his life, and all but plays a laugh track over it. You're laughing. He put 5 years of effort into 10% of a game and you're laughing. The whole thing is just so frustratingly passive-aggressive too. They're just laying into this guy. Kick him while he's down, why don't ya? It's all in favor of serving Yanfly's agenda that there's one right way to make a game. Reading even a little makes his opinion on Pansters obvious. If you prefer to write your story or make your game by flying from the seat of your pants, then not only are you doing things wrong, not only are you doing things inefficiently, but you are learning nothing, you are an idiot, and you are doomed to fail. Look at this shit! Not only are the final two panels a complete non sequitur so he can take another jab at Pansters, but there's this really weird wording about dreaming being bad somehow, despite the fact that yearn and dream have the same definition in this instance. I seriously do not get this. Is this a translation error? Is this a Japanism? Like how in America we say get the lead out and that means go faster? It seems Yanfly is under the misconception that if people don't completely plan out their games before working on the details, that they are working towards something unachievable. That seems to be the way he is using the word dream. Needless to say, this is not true. To help emphasize my point, in the first episode, Yanfly uses a metaphor to describe his method. Yanfly cites Ralph's method, and by extension my own, as building a house from one end to the other, and their own method as building a house starting with the foundation. Except there's one problem with that, Yanfly. We're not building a house. We're making a game. And though there is one correct way to build a house, there is more than one correct way to make a game. So if you didn't believe me when I said he's basically saying you're learning nothing, here's him literally saying that his method is the objectively correct one and that you shouldn't try anything else. The nail that stands up gets pounded down. That is a Japanism. Don't worry though, it gets worse. Throughout the comic, Flying Dream repeatedly praises Yanfly's method of game creation as being satisfying to test and play through. This happens no less than 2 times, and as early as the first episode we can see Yanfly's game skeleton, followed by Flying Dream being a yes man to Yanfly's methods, not even bothering to ask questions, because, of course, question asking is reserved for Ralph the Strawman, whose job is to be wrong. I've personally found good satisfaction in creating a single town, or a single piece of the overworld, or a single dungeon, or a single enemy set, or a single boss. Separating making your game into smaller goals like that can really help make the task of, well, making a game less of a monstrous undertaking. Yanfly here is doing the same thing I am. He's just doing it in a different way and saying that my way is wrong somehow. If you were or are in Ralph's position here, then you should know this. Ralph's problem isn't that he's making his game wrong, nor is it that he's a dreamer, whatever that means. Sure, he's got some minor hiccups in the way he does things. He doesn't know how to design towns or what to have NPCs say, but those are problems that are relatively minor to his actual main issue. Scope creep. As stated in the comic, Ralph would often think of something new in the middle of working on his game, then have to go back and change nearly everything to make the rest of the game fit his new idea, a problem that Yanfly doesn't seem to realize is mutually exclusive from building a game in a linear fashion, which isn't even a problem, it's a difference in fucking opinion. The inciting incident that kicks off the kinda sorta plot of the comic is Ralph realizing that he needs help after spending 5 years on a game and only getting 10% of it done. But it's quite possible that he reached that 10% threshold multiple times, thinking of something new to add after the fact and no longer considering the game 10% done because of it. I've been working on my game for about 1 to 2 months at the time of recording, but I know what I want my game to be, and big isn't really on my list. I'd already consider my game 10% done, and I'm building my game just like Ralph was. One chapter, one town at a time. To cap this off, I want to counter Yanfly's plotter method by pointing out one of the biggest flaws in their philosophy. In Chapter 2, Let's Make a Database, particularly in pages 16, the class test, and 17, skill tally test, the Strawman has a point. In testing which skills are used more often than others, Ralph points out the obvious, that there's nothing stopping them from spamming the strongest skills during the test because the only test class, which every character has access to all of the skills at all times. Even ignoring the immediate problem, Ralph is still right. Any player would use their strongest ability as often as they could.
Hope you don't mind if I fill you full of holes. Hope you don't mind if I fill you full of holes. Hope you don't mind if I fill you full of holes. Hope you don't mind if I fill you full of holes. Hope you don't mind if I fill you full of holes.
And suddenly, the microphone quality might have shifted dramatically because this is a new recording session and the air conditioner broke. Now, where was I? Flying Dream responds both times to this very obvious problem with, we're supposed to be testing the game, not breaking it, as if both that and whatever the fuck she means by that is obvious. Yanfly has an actual answer, but it's the dumbest possible answer to this incredibly valid point. You should only use skills that the player will have access to at the time. Except at this point in the comic, we have done zero work on the overworld, dungeons, or basic enemies. We don't know how long the player is going to be traveling, how many monsters they're going to fight, how much EXP those monsters would be worth, and by extension, what level the player would be or what skills they would have. Are spells learned via level up like in Dragon Quest? Or are spells learned via shops like in Final Fantasy? Who knows? And their response to what's stopping us from spamming the strongest skills is to pretend that those skills aren't there. At that point, we're just making baseless assumptions about what skills the player is going to have. If you think I'm exaggerating with that, I have an anecdote from one of my Discord pals where that literally happened. Now would probably be a good time to mention that this script was reworked from a rant I had on an RPG Maker Discord. Not to mention, we're not even sure if these are the skills we're going to see in the final game, which Ralph himself brought up on page 6, splitting up work. A legitimately good point and argument, which was straight up ignored with the ad hominem rebuttal, must you disagree with everything? I don't want to say that I hate Yanfly. They've done a lot to create many helpful plugins for RPG Maker MV, and these comics have some good advice, sometimes great advice. But the way the audience surrogate, and by extension, pansters in general, are treated, is doing nothing to inspire me. If anything, being told in the most passive-aggressive way imaginable that I learned nothing in all the years spent failing to make a game would be incredibly discouraging if I wasn't aware that it was a fucking lie.